Okay.
Okay.
Please turn off your mic.
Yes, it is turn off. Hello, everybody. I am Fernando Perez. I'm speaking from Chile. I'm an architect, professor, and currently director of the Fine Art National Museum. And it is my great pleasure to welcome you all to our World Heritage 2021 debate, and specifically to the thematic months dedicated to disasters and pandemics on World Heritage sites. This seminar has been organized by the Cultural Heritage Center from the Pontificia Universidad Católica de Chile. Thanks to all the teams responsible for that, Umberto, Karen, Yolanda, and Hilter. And this one-word seminar focuses on how pandemics and natural social disasters have affected and it continue affecting our World Heritage sites. We will have more than 20 sessions, a collective effort of more than 100 people coming from the most remote areas of the globe. The seminar is thought as a contribution to the World Heritage Initiative, which aims to heritage protection and conservation, to promoting knowledge as a base for heritage decision-making, and also a good governance of the World Heritage Convention, empowering civil society role in heritage protection processes. The coordinators and speakers of each session had shared and will share with us their knowledge and experience on different cases refers to the main concern of this seminar. Great privilege for all of us. We thank all of them. To complete this introduction, I give a general idea of the theme of this month. We will share with you a short video that explains how disasters and pandemics affects and threaten World Heritage sites. Please.
Recent disasters and an actual pandemic have exposed the fragility and vulnerability of our world heritage. These exceptional sites and pieces, which we would like to preserve for all humanity and future generations, do not exist in a segregated world. They belong to our social environment and our daily life. But at the same time, the World Heritage sites are in danger. They are threatened by natural hazards that attempt against their existence. The pandemic has revealed their fragility and how much the human presence in them is vital and necessary for their survival. How can we protect them and at the same time give them life and new meanings? If we hope for a future for them, we should stop considering them only as beautiful objects or places, merchandise for the tourist industry, and fully integrate them into the social and cultural dynamics of daily life. We propose to promote a great discussion around the world on the risks and effects of disasters and pandemics on World Heritage sites. We invite non-governmental organizations, academies, representatives of civil society and local governments to participate, to contribute with new proposals for public policies on the conservation and safeguarding of the cultural and natural heritage of humanity.
Today's session is number 9, entitled Culture, Heritage and Resilience, Local Creative Responses to Natural Disasters, COVID-19 and Climate Change. The session will be moderated by Isidora Larraín, International Consultant in Sustainable Heritage, Cities and Innovation, She's an architect educated at Universidad Católica de Chile and also pursued graduate studies at the Bartle School, University College, London. He will do these together with Paul Owens, Master of Arts in English and Modern History of the University of St. Andrews, and who is founder and director of BOP Consulting. He is an internationally recognized expert on culture and the creative economy, particularly interested in the relationship between culture and social and economic development. Special thanks to Isidora and Paul and all the presenters in this session. We are convinced that yours is a fascinating and increasingly important subject and wish you a fruitful session. Thank you very much. The floor is yours, Isidora.
Thanks, Fernando. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us and participating in this conversation. Today, we will have 6 different brief presentations exploring the intersection between 3 concepts that are not commonly together. So the first one is heritage, the second one is cultural and creative industries, and the third one is disasters and pandemics. In order to keep this conversation more dynamic, I'm sharing the virtual stage with Paul. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you very much, Isidora, and thank you for inviting me to co-moderate this fascinating session with you. It's great to be here and see our amazing collection of speakers. I was very interested in what the video just said now about trying to place heritage, world heritage, in the context of the social and cultural dynamics of daily life. And we all know, don't we, that, heritage sites, heritage doesn't sit in isolation. It's part of a sort of an ecosystem, if you like, whether that's artists, creative businesses, tourism, volunteers, the supply chains that make these things possible in the first place. So we thought it would be really interesting today to just explore in a bit more detail the role particularly of the creative and cultural ecosystems that surround heritage sites. And we thought we'd put on the table 3 big questions. The first one is, how can cultural and creative ecosystems help to build up the resilience of heritage sites? So it's the sort of how question, the overall how question. I think we also want to explore what we've learned from previous disasters, but also from our attempts to just heighten awareness of what we can do to prepare for disasters. And we've got 6 incredible case studies, which I think will bear lots and lots of fruit in answering that question. And then finally, I think it's beholden on us all to really think deeply about what we've learned from the sort of slow crisis of the last year with the COVID. And, what has that taught us? What has that brought to the fore? And how can we kind of really move forward and learn from that? So those are our 3 questions. We've asked all the speakers, obviously, to address those in the case studies I'll present. We also hope that the audience will put questions out there, and Isidora and I will try and pick those up as we go along and maybe come back to that at the end. Isidora.
Thanks, Paul, for the exciting questions. And we are really looking forward to the questions from the audience too. So remember, we are discussing creativity. Let us be creative and take the chance of asking, commenting, starting maybe by commenting right now in the chat about your background and city of origin, please. So for example, I will write here, architect from Santiago.
Great. So is it me now?
Maybe people can share, there is my answer. Maybe everyone can share where they are from.
Okay.
So just a quick reminder, this webinar is designed for practitioners, academia, and communities. So ideally, we will get fresh ideas to rethink our own city on these terms. And then with no more words, please, Paul, let's start.
Okay, great. Thanks everyone for posting their little posts there. It's interesting just to see it flashing in front of me. You get a sense of who the audience is. That's quite important. So as Isidora says, we're spanning the globe. We're going from east to west. We're coming at this from a range of different angles, from individual artists to creative businesses to mental health of individuals and young people. And I want to start in Japan, and I want to introduce you to our first speaker, who's an artist and a curator. Her name is Yumi Yoshikawa. And she has been involved in an amazing project or series of projects in response to the 2011 tsunami and earthquake in the east of Japan. The project's called the Kiriko project. It's in one of the towns on the east coast that was worst hit by the disaster, which is called MinamiSanriku. And Yumi, we're very, very much looking forward to hearing your case study.
Hello, everybody. Good evening. Sorry, I'm speaking Japanese. Interpretation, please. 私は、日本の、南三陸町という、津波の被害地で活動しています。早速私のビデオを皆さんに見ていただきたいと思います。I'll share you my movie now.
Hello, everyone. I'm Yumi Yoshikawa. I have been organizing several community art projects in MinamiSanriku, Japan, damaged by the tsunami of March 11, 2011. Among these, I would like to talk about the Kiriko project, which has continued for 11 years. I first started my project in summer 2010, 6 months before the tsunami. Traditional Japanese homes have a kamidana, an altar where the guardian deity of the house is enshrined. In this region, there is a custom of decorating this altar with white paper cutouts called Kiriko, purchased from a nearby shrine. Inspired by this beautiful cultural practice, I came up with the idea of a community art project called the Kiriko Project. I visited houses on the main street with women from the town and asked about the memories and histories of the people in each house. Then we cut patterns to represent those stories using the same cutout techniques used to make Kiriko, and decorated the eaves of the houses with the cutouts to share their stories. Our mission was to unearth the town's hidden stories and share them among the residents so that they could gain a deeper understanding of each other and rebuild the relationships that would energize the town. For example, there were several storehouses in this old house which used to make soy sauce. Some of the storehouses had hexagonal patterns, such as these on their walls. In Japan, there is a tradition of offering mochi for the New Year. In this house, 12 breast-shaped mochi were made and displayed. Apparently, they made them with a wish for many children to be born. Therefore, we made Kiriko with the patterns of the warehouse wall and the 12 breast-shaped mochi. About 20 women took part in the project, and we made 650 paper cutouts in total to decorate the houses along the 1 kilometer route in 2010. 5 months later, that whole townscape was lost to the tsunami, and about 10,000 people were left without a place to live. Imagine it would be like if one day everything except for the clothes you were wearing were to disappear while you went out. The people who live next door to you and the people who live next door to them have had everything swept away as well. Some of them have lost their loved ones, while others have lost places containing all of their life's precious memories. It's a chaotic situation. For the past 11 years, in a town that is slowly recovering from such tragedy, we have been working on the Kiriko project every summer. Over time, our mission has changed. In 2012, we set up temporary Kiriko boards like this one at the sites where houses had been washed away. At each site, we installed a pair of boards, one with a message about how the owner of the plot is living now, and another with a paper cutout pattern. In the place where the city center used to be, the whiteboards we installed brought back memories of the old townscape and the livelihoods of the people who had lived there. There were even people who said that seeing those boards made them happier than having a house built. Perhaps this was because these signs offered the only proof that they had lived in this town for generations. The Kiriko also served as an intermediary for communicating with the deceased. One day, a woman whose parents had been killed in tsunami came to make a paper cutout. She thought that people might remember her parents if she made a Kiriko from memories of her parents' vegetable shop. By sharing with the others the evidence of the lives of their deceased loved ones, people may have come to accept their absence. In this town, I often hear the elderly grumble. There hasn't been a single good thing in my life. They worked hard to build their homes, and just when they thought they could finally live comfortably, everything was swept away from them. So it's natural for them to feel this way. Now we go out to the community centers of the public housing complexes, have tea with the residents, listen to each of their stories, and make Kiriko based on them. Sueko, who is 81 years old, also told us, "Nothing good ever happened to me." Since she was a child, to help her family make ends meet, she and her two older sisters tread wheat in the fields until late at night. She told us how hard it was, but she was all smiles when she talked about seeing the beautiful moon from the wheat fields and the memories of sitting around the dining table with her family. We made a Kiriko of a foot treading wheat and gave it to her. When we looked at the Kiriko and appreciated her strong, vibrant life, I think she was able to feel a sense of validation about her own existence. In every person's life, there is a moment where light shines, a sheen that brings a smile to the heart. Sueko made us aware of Kiriko's power of recalling memories that can light up a person's heart. Thus, began the process of creating various patterns that only the persons for whom they were made could decipher. For the people who lost the things that were the proof of their lives to the tsunami, the paper cutouts became a tool with which to share their lives with others and to bring a positive perspective, enabling them to love themselves. People who have had their lives appreciated by someone else are able to respect the lives of others. As relationships of mutual respect are created among people, trusting relationships will be nurtured in the new community. Through this cycle, people will be saved from a sense of loss and heartbreaking loneliness. In the hope that we might help with this process, we continue our humble community art activities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. 日本で喋って大丈夫でしょうか。私たちの活動はもともとの、日本にあるその神社の宗教的なキリコを、その存在を知らしめることにもなりましたし、多くの博物館関係者などがその調査に訪れたりしたという効果もありました。10年津波から経ったんですけれども、やっと今、人々が、10年前の津波のことを話ができるようにやっとなったという回復状況です。アートプロジェクトは、息の長い、心の復興の支援につながるのかなというふうに思っています。終わります。Thank you.
Yumi, thank you very, very much for that incredibly moving story. What I really loved about that case study was, apart from just the simplicity and beauty of the Kirikos, I mean, really just came out of the screen. It was fantastic. But I love the way something that's kind of so simple can have such a deep personal resonance, but also, as you say, very movingly can connect people through memory, through heritage, and through a sort of joint sense of shared identity. Isidora, can I ask Yumi a question? Is that part of the plan?
That's not on the script, but you can do it.
Can I? Okay. So it's very interesting to me that you took a very small community arts project, and it was very fortunate that you happened to be in that town at the time. And then obviously you responded to the crisis with taking your project, using your project in a new way. Who was supporting you to do that? How was it actually funded after the tsunami?
企業の助成金を受けていました。複数の企業さんが、私たちに、支援をしてくれましたけれども、幸いにもこのプロジェクトは材料が紙なのでとてもチープなんですね。なのでお金があまりかからないプロジェクトであったということも長く続けられた、一つの要因かと思います。
Okay, very interesting. I know. I think it's interesting. It's worth for the audience generally. It's worth finding out more about the story of the 2011 tsunami and actually the response of the creative community across Japan to that, and how they really mobilized to help those communities on the East Coast. It's a brilliant case study of the creative community as a whole responding to a disaster in a creative and powerful way. Okay, thank you very much. We need to move on. We're now going to our second speaker, Polly Alakija, I know Polly very well through the work that we do together on the World Cities Culture Forum. She's a stalwart member of our network, and she does brilliant things in Lagos. She's a brilliant and well-known artist in her own right, but she's also CEO of Cowries Arts Education Initiative. And Polly's going to talk to us about the work that she's doing, which brings the perspective of young people, but also educators into the picture. So Polly, looking forward to what you had to say.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Paul, for that introduction. I think I always have to start by explaining myself a little bit, because of course I don't look like I'm from Lagos. I moved to Nigeria over 30 years ago from West London, where my background was in arts and in education. And I moved to rural Nigeria in 1989. So completely different set of circumstances. This was pre-internet, pre-cell phone, in fairly rural Nigeria, and immediately realized that I had to question relevance and impact on what I was doing, and that everything I had experienced before had to be called into question. But having said that, at the same time acknowledging that each child has the same rights and each child has the same responsibilities, and each child, no matter your demographic, deserves the best that we can deliver. So what does the Cowries Arts Education Initiative do? We have a lot of fun, and I always say to everybody, that's what we try and do. We try to bring fun and magic into the learning experience, because that is what arts and culture is all about. And what we do is we say we support our educational system. We're here to support and complement an educational system that has no history in its curriculum. The Nigerian educational curriculum is all delivered in English, and there's no history in the curriculum. Our children do not speak English across the country. So 80% of the country speaks other languages. So we are very challenged with our curriculum. It is what it is. So we come in, we step in, and we use cultural and arts-based activities to support children's learning outcomes. For instance, if we're talking about arts history in school and education, a child in the West, in Europe, in the UK and the US, is more likely to know about the Benin bronzes than children here. When I walk into a school here and talk about Benin bronzes to children here and to the teachers, they've got no idea what I'm talking about. So we are very challenged. With Cowries, we have 4 key projects that we deliver. My story of water, my story of food, my story of energy, my story of balance. Under those 4 story umbrellas, we reflect all the sustainable development goals. So we very much work alongside the sustainable development goals. They form the direction that we take our core learning activities. We don't deliver it directly like that to children, but for our educators, it's always a way to call into question relevance and impact. So pre-pandemic, we were largely training the trainer, doing hands-on workshops, supporting the teacher and the educator and being more creative through hands-on workshops and through delivery of materials as far as we could. Pre-pandemic, we'd already started reaching outside of the classroom. In Nigeria, we have the highest out-of-school numbers across the world. Before the pandemic, we had 11 million children out of school. We're now looking at closer to 14 million children out of school, and that trend is not changing. We have considerable security challenges, especially in the north of the country. So a lot of those children will never go back into formal education. So already pre-pandemic, we were questioning how to educate in communities where security is an issue, where girls particularly are liable to be married by the time they're 14 or 15. So how do you reach those communities? And then along came COVID and the pandemic, and now what? That was the end of our hands-on workshops. Everybody was pressurizing us to get online, do online learning. But as you will see in my slideshow that I'll show to you in a minute, our children, our communities are not online. They barely have electricity in their communities. So being online is a dream for 99% of the children that we are trying to access. So we buckled down and got to work developing the resources that we needed to distribute into the communities. So we literally spent the time, you can see me, creating worksheets that we printed and distributed across the country. We focused on My Story of Water last year because it was very easy within My Story of Water to also address sanitation and health issues. We break down our projects into 8 different sections, and we look at trade, we look at history, we look at culture, we look at storytelling. We bring in all sorts of other skills into the activities we do, but we do it through a range of creative activities, from storytelling, drama, poetry, pottery, construction. Now, the great takeaway with what happened last year, our private sector partners came to the table. We were able to print in the middle of full-on lockdown. Private sector courier companies literally came to my door, picked up these worksheets and distributed them across the country. The big takeaway we had was that we had designed these worksheets to have 1 worksheet per child. It then turned out they were so popular, it was 1 worksheet per family, and the whole family was getting involved, from the aunties, the uncles, the parents, not only in the Southwest, but the remarkable thing was how accepted they were in the north of the country, where we have security issues, where the perception is that our Muslim communities there are not particularly interested in formal education. So that was the big takeaway, that how accepted these culturally based learning activities were in homes in the north of the country. As a result of that, we've now partnered with UNICEF, and we're looking at focusing on community-based learning based on cultural activities in order to get all these 14 million children learning, continuous learning using cultural activities that speak to the communities about their culture and what's going on in their culture. So I just want to share a few images with you all so you get a sense of what it's all looking like in the field. So here we go. This is pre-pandemic. We encourage our children to think big and dream big. We project our children's artwork in a variety of ways and try and celebrate the educator, the teacher, and the child. Murals, we do murals everywhere we go. And as you can see, everybody joins in. We showcase not only in Nigeria, but internationally as well. This is London some years back. This little boy has painted a jerry can. This was around my story of water. Of all the children we work with, I would say 95% of our children carry water to their homes and to schools every day. And whenever we work in communities, we ask children, do you tell us about collecting water? All our children love collecting water. So we always have these debates around, we need to get water to these communities, yet actually the children love collecting water. We talk about history. Through my story of water, we can start talking about trade. And of course that reflects in stories around the slave trade. And interestingly enough, again, all the communities we've worked with, not one community has discussed the slave trade with their families, yet every community in recent living memory can reference a family member that was directly impacted by the slave trade. So initially, pre-COVID, it's training the trainer, hands-on workshops, getting away with stuff that we certainly couldn't get away with in UK and in Europe, like painting petrol stations. We do murals everywhere we go. And then along came COVID, and along came the need to print and develop these resources. So here you see children receiving worksheets. This is in the middle of full-on lockdown, printed, developed worksheets. We have community educators, community volunteers around the country who receive these worksheets and distribute to the community. We translate as much as we can into the mother tongue. We have, again, brilliant private sector partners that do all the translation for us. So depending on the community, we tend to have 80% in mother tongue and 20% in English. We talk a lot about making a space for learning. What does a learning space look like if it's not a classroom? And so we talk about the learning mat, which of course in our cultures here in Nigeria, a mat is how we live, a mat is how a lot of our communities organize their social life. And so as you can see, the mat has become the safe learning space inside the home and inside the compound. These photographs I'm sharing with you are from largely northwest and northeast of Nigeria, where we have massive security issues with a lot of kidnappings going on from schools and other security challenges. We had a bit of a challenge, and we still have a bit of a challenge, trying to get teachers to let go of the learning process and help us in supporting the learning process in homes. But as you can see here, the process is on its way. Again, back to narratives around the slave trade. Now, these are workshops happening by communities, community-led by parents, working as much as possible with resources that children can find in their communities. Embroidery, stitch work is a great thing. Our children have more access to a needle and a thread than to paper and pencil. And especially again in the north of the country where we still have living traditions of a lot of embroidery, it's a way to get parents involved. So interestingly enough, the embroidery is very much starting to be driven by the fathers in a family rather than the moms. All sorts of different ways of approaching education, getting children to look at things from a different perspective. We talk about bird's eye view. So here we have a bird's eye view of a farm. Telling stories. I work very closely with Montessori organization in London who help us with the developmental learning stages that we build into all of our activities. Multiple births, math through multiple births. Nigeria has amongst the highest rate of multiple births in the country. So that's always a really great way to start math activities.
Polly, I'm going to have to just in terms of time, I don't want to interrupt you in full flow, but if you can just wrap up, I've got a question for you.
Okay. So let me just fast track through these images so you can see what's happening on the ground, the embroidery. I wanted to just quickly show you the clay work that's happening, looking at traditional architecture, getting them to observe what's going on in their communities and modeling. And here we go, reflecting local customs in different ways. There we go.
Can I just before I move on to the next speaker, just a clarification. Can I just confirm what you said about the curriculum, the school curriculum in Nigeria? You're saying that it doesn't include history?
No, there's no history taught in our schools.
Okay, so what you're doing with your project there is you're doing a sort of combination of history, environment, civic consciousness. And what I think is really interesting and important about your project is the way it's focused on young people, the next generation, but it's fascinating. And sadly, we haven't got enough time. Maybe we'll explore it in the Q&A. It's fascinating to me, the sort of ripple effect you're achieving by involving the teachers, because obviously, you've got quite a lot of challenges within the education system itself, but also just what you mentioned briefly there a couple of times, the idea that it actually then ripples out to the families, the mothers and the fathers and the community. So, but anyway, that's a brilliant example. And I urge everyone, by the way, to have a look at Polly's work, and the project she mentioned, My Story of Water, is a brilliant project. There was a brilliant exhibition about it in London about 3 years ago. Okay, we're going to move on to our third speakers now. And we're coming to the UK, which is where I'm based in London. And the appropriately named Paul Heritage is going to be speaking to us. I've never met Paul, although Paul is a bit of a legend in the UK and other parts of the world. And his colleague, Mariana Stefan, who work for People's Palace Projects. And we're going to sort of continue the theme of young people here, which is great. So over to you, Paul and Mariana.
Thanks so much. I obviously changed my name for whichever project I'm doing. So Mariana's going to be showing some slides. I
think, is it just me or is Paul frozen?
Frozen. He's frozen.
He's frozen. Maybe Mariana, if you're still there, you can just pick up.
You do, but I think he's oh, he's
back. He's back.
Sorry.
You froze.
The fragility of our environment starts. I'm speaking from Rio. Mariana is speaking from Porto. So let's go for it, Mariana. So as we know, I'm going to be talking about arts and youth mental health during the COVID-19 crisis pandemic in the UK. Thank you. So as we know, the COVID-19 pandemic has created an urgent problem for mental health in young people, especially those living in large cities and already facing challenges linked to poor mental health. So we created this research project with funding from the Arts and Humanities Research Council called Far Apart and Close at Heart, which brings together 5 arts organizations strongly rooted in local territories with rich cultural heritages in these 3 cities, which I hope you recognize as London, Manchester, and Cardiff. Together, they are sharing experiences of how the intangible values of diverse art practices have continued to maintain young people's mental health in face of the restrictions that have had to be in place because of the pandemic. Why? Why did we set up this research project? We set it up, as we say, because the COVID-19 pandemic has created such an urgent problem for mental health in young people, especially those living in large cities. And these arts organizations in these 3 cities work with young people who are associated with or experiencing low educational achievement and social exclusion, particularly brought on by factors related to racism. All of these stress factors are part of the process that disables them from connecting with and contributing to the development of their own ancestral heritages within the UK, as well as creating and develop their own cultural inventions, disturbances, disruptions, which are vital to the evolution of new cultural forms and artistic expressions. That's what we want young people to do. We want them to be disrupting us. And COVID has broken that process. So we're working with arts organizations that have strong community links, Contact Theatre in Manchester, National Theatre of Wales, and Dirty Protest, a new writing company in Wales, Battersea Arts Centre, and Stratford East Theatre Royal in London. The COVID-19, all of them have strong community links, and they already play a vital role in promoting mental well-being with young people, because they support them using their different art forms, all different methodologies. But of course, in the past, it's been based on in-person work. That's what arts organizations do. The COVID-19 pandemic and resulting social distances measures forced arts organizations to move their activities online, changing the ways in which they support vulnerable young people. That's why we launched this study. So we've looked at where, we've looked at the partners. Now let's look at how, what we're actually doing with them. Conducting a study is about looking at how arts organizations, co-creating with these organizations, a study that examines how they've adapted to maintain their support for that mental health resilience of young people through cultural activities during a time when mental health of young people is most under threat. And in fact, when they themselves have not been able to do what they usually do, bring young people together to create. So we've been examining the impact of this change, this shift to the digital, both on arts workers themselves and on how young people are experiencing this new way of connecting with their peers and with their communities. We interview staff responsible to deliver those activities during the pandemic. We talk to their stakeholders. Of course, young people are talking to each other. We conduct arts workshops to understand how young people are dealing with the changes in their lives during the COVID-19 pandemic. And those arts workshops will result in a whole range of activities that we'll be producing in July and August of this year. We are also, of course, building research capacity within arts organizations, which is at the heart of our work within People's Palace Projects, which is based at the University of London. We love to co-create research. We want to share research tools. And this project is actually based on the one that we're just finishing in Latin America, which Mariana is now going to just say a few words about. Mariana.
Thank you. And hello, everyone. Just very quickly, as Paul was mentioning, this project actually originated from a similar study that we are just conducting in Latin America. And we have already some learnings to share with you. First, with the 5 organizations that we have worked in Latin America, what we found through the interviews with young people was that arts activities during the pandemic were more engaging and welcoming than online classes. And here you can see a couple of images from the online workshops that we've done as part of the project. So we also have found that the arts activities help young people by reducing loneliness and boredom. And as well, they help them to feel more motivated and to also create some distance from all the distress and feelings they were experiencing because of the pandemic. And one of the most interesting things from this research that we found is that by using arts methods to investigate this experience of young people during the pandemic, we ended up creating a space for well-being, a much needed space of well-being for them. By sharing their feelings, by creating this opportunity for them to be heard by arts facilitators and to express what they were feeling because of the pandemic. So thank you.
Thank you, Mariana. And just to say, our Latin America for this didn't include Chile, unfortunately, but we were working in Bogota, in Lima, in Buenos Aires, and in Rio de Janeiro. So I'm now just briefly, and it will be just a quick 6 minutes, we're going to look at a second project, which is specifically looking at cultural heritage sites in Brazil. So Thiago, if you can share, and Thiago is going to also say a few words at the end. This is a project that we call Roots of Resilience, and it is based on this site in Minas Gerais, which is in the center of a state in the center of Brazil. At 12:28 on the 25th of January, 2019, a technical crew was working at the top of dam number 1, the Córrego do Feijão iron ore mine in Brazil, when a crack appeared in its 86-meter high earth-filled wall. In 6 seconds, the dam was breached. Before any alarm could be actioned, 13 million cubic meters of mud shot through the wall at 80 kilometers per hour, engulfing the immediate vicinity where 641 staff were working, resting from their shift or having lunch in the canteen. The avalanche of mud and mineral deposits crashed unabated through Brumadinho and neighboring towns. In less than 3 hours, the mudslide traveled over 300 kilometers, contaminating the environment, lives, and livelihoods of over 940,000 people. Described as a premeditated disaster by the local mining union, the accident at Brumadinho was this region's 7th dam burst in 3 decades. Between 2015 and 2019, hazardous Anthropocene industrial mining technologies have resulted in 2 major natural and humanitarian disasters in this region, prompting the loss of almost 300 lives and devastating a 1,000-kilometer watershed. With 51 further dams in the region assessed by Brazil's National Water Authority as in the highest risk category and capable of causing as much damage or more than the Brumadinho disaster, there is an acute threat to Brazilian cultural heritage from dam failures and their resulting environmental, humanitarian, and cultural impact. The Iron Quadrangle, which is this region, is the site of Brazil's largest iron ore reserves, lying under the mountain ridges that demarcate it as a region of rich cultural, environmental, and historical value. Gold, soapstone, various virulent pigments of the minerals of the Iron Quadrangle, this region, were transformed in the 17th and 18th century by sculptors, painters, craft workers, and engineers into architecture that represents the apotheosis of the Brazilian Baroque. It includes 2 UNESCO World Heritage Sites, Ouro Preto, a treasure of human genius, and the Sanctuary of Bom Jesus de Congonhas, the apex of Christian art in Latin America. But the region's abundant immaterial culture is rooted in tastes, sounds, words, rhythms, dances, decorations, and rituals that have been forged in contested histories and mined from Brazil's most vertiginous and verdant lands. This region embraces 5 towns that are classified as national heritage sites, hundreds of tangible monuments and intangible markers of those who've shaped and been shaped by this land over 11 centuries. Latin America's oldest prehistoric remains, the Luisa skull, was discovered in a rock shelter in this area. Archaeological finds within the region include some of Brazil's most significant indigenous rock paintings and ceramics. The region's immaterial culture spans a celebrated culinary heritage, music from indigenous flutes to baroque string orchestras to country music and the tambores, the drums of Afro-Brazilian dance rituals. It is a territory marked out by processions, ritual mast raisings, the coronations of kings and queens during the Congado festival. So how are we researching and attempting to activate this cultural history as part of the preservation of it? This pilot project we are undertaking creates measures that will influence decisions or seek to influence decisions by policymakers by highlighting the measurable social, cultural, and economic benefits of cultural assets and resources in dialogue with the local communities, artists, and cultural organizations. It takes community-based collaborative approaches to redress the chronic lack of data in Brazil's current disaster response policy. In partnership with the Instituto Inhotim, which you can see here in one of these photos, which is Latin America's largest outdoor art collection and one of Brazil's most prestigious contemporary art galleries, which is in the region. The research team from People's Palace Projects, together with Inhotim, have proposed and are testing a methodology to train representatives from local arts and cultural organizations to co-create inventories of cultural practices and assets. Using multidisciplinary indicator tools to calibrate cultural value, the research will examine what role cultural heritage can have as part of a process of transformation and regeneration. The project establishes Inhotim as what we describe a competence center, a hub for a community-based research strategy that values cultural heritage as a means of securing survival against future risks. We are training local arts and cultural organizations in research tools that contribute to establishing the value of cultural heritage in safeguarding the Iron Quadrangle region from the continuous pressures of natural hazards and anthropogenic effects. We will put forward recommendations on structures for collaborative data production to improve the risk management of cultural heritage in this region with wider relevance for Brazil and internationally. Thiago.
Thank you, Paul. I will use these final minutes to talk about where we are in the research process and the next steps. So as Paul mentioned, besides Inhotim, which is also acting as the local facilitator, we have invited 5 very distinct art organizations from 4 different cities in the region. One is a theater company, an arts organization that works with young people, a foundation dedicated to the promotion of literature and new writing, a cultural center that works with decolonizing heritage, and a symphonic band. 2 representatives from each organization have taken part in 8 workshops in April and May to understand the specific socio-economic challenges of their territories and the value of their practices for the local communities. During these workshops, they have co-created inventories of the material and immaterial heritage of their communities, such as oral histories, social practices, traditional knowledge, arts and crafts, among others. They also created indicators and questions about the impact of the recent disasters on the heritage and in the lives of their communities. And they are now working together on a declaration, a manifesto about the importance of cultural heritage for their community. In the next phases of the projects, these 6 arts organizations will start the process of research design, defining the population they will survey, creating consent forms and the survey instrument. Later in August and September this year, they will then conduct the data collection and data analysis to be presented in a final seminar in November. All of this data will inform policy brief, and we will create a new toolkit about the methodology that will be made available for local teachers and local organizations. And we hope that these new narratives that we are helping to create and to shape will contribute to establishing the value of cultural heritage in safeguarding the region. So if you're interested in knowing more about the work, I'm going to put my email address and the link to the project on the chat. And thank you very much.
Thanks a lot to Mariana, Thiago, and Paul for these very interesting presentations. We jumped from Europe to Latin America, so it was a very interesting journey. And I would like to highlight 2 things from these projects. The first one is how it's possible to build a connection between research and practice. So it's very interesting how there are some universities involved and also local communities, governments, and so on. So that's a very interesting point. And also another one is that how these projects are place-based in very unique places, but also able to build some international cooperation. So that's very interesting. And thank you to all of you for bringing this to us. Now we will continue traveling to the east, to the USA. And the American artist Eve Mosher will share with us 2 interrelated projects, one in New York City and another one in Philadelphia. Eve, please, if you can share your presentation.
Great, thank you so much, Isidora. And it's such an honor to be presenting as part of this conversation on sort of the intersection of heritage, creative industries, and disasters. And some amazing projects shared so far. So it's been really exciting. I will start sharing my presentation. And just to say, again, my name is Eve Mosher. I have been living in New York City for many years, recently relocated to Scotland. And I work at the intersection of people, place, and climate, and really try to recognize the fact that the arts has many different roles, as we've heard today, to play in this changing world. And I like to kind of put those in buckets of truth, telling the truth about the changes that we're facing, creating space to have sort of emotional connection to that truth, to that data, creating space to grieve and to heal, and building capacity for imagination so that we can begin to imagine what is possible. And it's really interesting to follow after the artists and organizations I've already presented. I heard Yumi talking about her Kiriko project, and that was how it was really used as a grief and healing tool. And then also Paul and Mariana talked about that and the work that they were doing. And Polly talking about bringing in this truth of the history into the creative educational projects that she was working on. And then just recently, Paul and Mariana also talking about creativity as a sort of tool of resilience. So I am going to share 2 projects. One, well, actually, I'll just share them. I don't need to talk about how long I'm going to talk about them. So I actually began working on climate change, whoops, I went too fast, in 2007 with a project called High Water Line. And with this project, I mapped the, using a sports field marker and powder blue chalk, the areas in different urban environments that were susceptible to increased flooding and storm surge due to climate change. So the project started in New York City, in which the line really went through a lot of historic neighborhoods and sites, as well as a number of different vulnerable communities. It is an archipelago, 520 miles of coastline. And the project itself sought to kind of create a space where we could have conversations. And these conversations were happening in the very places where people live, work, and play. And that was really important because it allowed us to kind of have not only that emotional connection to the data, like this is where this is happening, but also to talk about the sort of complex psychology of our connection to place. So, when we think about home, there's a lot of complexity when you talk about home and how that might change because of climate change. So this project actually was really used as a space to grapple with the changing environment in which we are living and begin to surface. It was initially started many years ago, began to surface some of the ways that we can be agents of change and responding to the changing environment. And the project, I worked on the project in New York City, in Philadelphia, in Miami, and in Bristol in the UK. And since then developed a guide to allow others to undertake the project, and communities have taken on the project on their own in Hawaii and most recently in Stockholm, Sweden. So that was High Waterline Project, and that project really was my entry into kind of working in this way in the public, in sort of performative acts around climate issues. And it really filled this kind of space of evidencing the impacts. Since then, I have, it's been a lot of different projects and a lot of work, but I'm really focused now on how we can create space for getting creative about solutions and adaptation. So the project I'm working on right now is called Heat Response. It's in partnership with the nonprofit Trust for Public Land and other artists, Jose Ortiz Pagan, Jenna Robb, and Amber Art and Design. And this is a project that's based in Philadelphia, and it is happening in 3 communities who are considerably hotter than the surrounding neighborhoods. And by considerably hotter, on the hottest days, that can be anywhere from 10 to 20 degrees Fahrenheit, hotter than neighboring communities. So this has a tremendous amount of impacts on communities, educational prospects for youth, infant mortality, elder mortality. There's a lot of really severe impacts from heat. And it's one of those kind of sneaking climate impacts, right? We kind of just adapt as much as we can, but it's actually going to be one of the climate impacts that is going to kill the most people, because it is something that is just sort of endemic, it happens everywhere, and it's getting worse and worse, and we don't actually have the infrastructure to respond to it at the moment. So the way that we're kind of working into this idea of like cultural heritage in this project is we spent the first almost year of the project in a listening process. So meeting the communities in which we're working, using creativity as a method to really get to know the communities. And the really beautiful thing about the 3 different communities is they are so incredibly diverse. We have 3 different neighborhoods, and within each of the 3 neighborhoods, you have a diverse set of communities that are sort of intersecting in those areas. And what we're starting to do is kind of, from what we've learned from these communities, is recognize that there's a lot of experience and expertise that comes along with the existing cultural heritage of the communities that we're working with that is being woven into creative adaptation and responses to climate change. So we're just now getting into, like literally right now, launching the sort of bigger projects that we are developing. They will happen over the summer of 2021 that are the creative adaptation, creative response to urban heat issues. So some of the things that we've that have come up through the process of this project that we've learned from either some of the artists coming to the project or from the communities, and this is the way that they work. We've also learned from the communities themselves, and we've shared on Zoom calls cooling teas based on botanicals from our Latinx community. There's work being done on different gardening techniques and learning about what plants, particularly food plants, grow in areas of high heat and humidity as well as flooding. We're starting to see an evolution of the climate of Philadelphia, and we're learning from our Southeast Asian communities on the kinds of ways that we can garden in response to that. And we're also seeing a lot of the cultural heritage being evidenced through different projects and interpretations, from murals to poetry to cooking to even interpretations around what superheroes might be utilized to fight climate change or to help us as communities adapt to the changing environment. So I kept my conversation really short, so we'll have lots of time for questions and answers. But, I just want to kind of wrap up by reiterating the idea that we as artists have this role to play in the changing climate, and it really expands between building a space for sharing stories and imagining solutions, that we can kind of weave together the different cultural heritage in order to create a network of resilience and to begin to imagine solutions. So, by bringing in these different backgrounds and lived experiences from all the communities we're working with, we are able to come up with maybe even more creative solutions than if we kept it in the sort of silos of expertise and knowledge. And so I continue to keep working with different communities and looking towards solutions and scaling up solutions and sort of starting small and starting with the experience and expertise that already exists, because there is such strong cultural heritage in our urban environments. So that's my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eve, for the visual and field experience to build awareness. One thing is that we read something in the newspaper like New York is flooding, and another very different thing is to see a line in the floor showing a historic house, for example, and see that that house will be underwater. So thank you for all your work. Also with the heat in Philadelphia, heat is affecting all of us. Even in Chile, we have a big issue with that. So thank you for your presentation. Now we will move to our final presentation, and it will be slightly different because we have the pleasure to have with us Amy Schwartzman and Ted Berger. They are from the steering committee of the National Coalition for Arts in the USA, and they are helping us to understand how all these great initiatives are affecting the public policy. So please, Amy and Ted.
Thank you so much, Isidora, and hello, everyone. I'm going to share my screen right now, and give me a moment. Here we go. It's such a pleasure to be with you here today. And through this presentation, Ted and I want to present a new framework for thinking about how to protect our cultural heritage through protecting those who create it.
Thank you for this opportunity. It's a great pleasure for us to be with this distinguished and passionate and creative group. We see arts and culture heritage on a continuum, being curated and reevaluated over time. Cultural values change as historians, funders, and marketplace shift. As society changes, cultural heritage shifts. It's not static. However, the people whose creative labor advances what frequently becomes cultural heritage, living artists and other cultural workers, are too often invisible in cultural heritage thinking. People conceived and built the pyramids. Women artists, ignored in the canon, are now being celebrated. Black artists, once lost and forgotten, shape our artistic worlds and public dialogue. People create new expressions of being alive. Yet when we talk about protecting cultural heritage, we largely talk about protecting what is dead. Cultural heritage usually gives greater value to what gets built than to the people creating that heritage. In the US, communities increasingly are linking past, present, and future. In Lower Manhattan, at the World Trade Center site, the creation of the Tribute in Light acknowledges the absence of the presence of those once alive.
In the US, we use, as does the rest of the world, the term cultural heritage, but we also use the term cultural resources, which is not used elsewhere. And to us in the arts sector and most ordinary people, it seems intuitive that artists and arts organizations in all disciplines, visual, performing, literary, and otherwise, are cultural resources, for without them, there would be no art, which is part of culture. But they're not included in the definition because it's a defined term that was invented in the 1970s by our National Park Service to describe the architectural, archaeological, and historical sites and properties and objects on the park lands they steward. And it also includes the museums, archives, and libraries which collect, exhibit, and house work that we look at, and they preserve these things. This idea of protecting and preserving our cultural heritage in a paired way with our natural heritage goes back to the 1900s. And it developed that way because it rose in relation to the national parks where these resources exist together. This idea of paired protection was adopted years later into the World Heritage Convention, as well as our disaster management system. But because artists and arts organizations are not considered cultural resources, their recovery after disasters is not seen to by our government, except in occasional cases when the locale advocates for it. We want to change this and have been doing advocacy with our Congress and our Federal Emergency Management Agency to make it policy that they are cultural resources. And that we is NCAPER, on whose steering committee Ted and I sit.
We knew the safety net for the arts and artists is full of holes or non-existent, particularly in communities of color disproportionately affected by disasters of all kinds. In the US, an emergency support system had developed for cultural things, but little existed when crises impact the living people who make those things. Every time an arts emergency happened, communities reinvented separate responses. Little existed to share systemic experiences and knowledge regarding natural and human-made disasters in the arts. After Hurricane Katrina in 2005, our sector required better preparation. In 2006, the National Coalition for Arts Preparedness and Emergency Response emerged, committed to the idea that the resiliency of artists and the arts and cultural sector is critical to the resiliency of communities and as a whole. NCAPER is primarily a voluntary force experienced with arts cultural disasters. NCAPER focuses on organizations and people, helping with tool replacement costs and addressing other financial and emotional losses. The cultural heritage sector focuses on things, such as repairing and replacing buildings, collections, and objects. Thanks to recent infrastructure support from the Mellon Foundation, NCAPER is now collaborating with the existing cultural heritage support sector to strengthen the arts and cultural ecosystem. This effort is critical because of what this massive pandemic reveals. People do matter, and no self-help system of the private sector is capable of meeting the recovery needs of both people and things.
I want to note that we are actually joined here today for this presentation by our executive director at NCAPER. So just a small note about that. While we advocate and work to strengthen the readiness, resilience, and recovery needs of artists and arts organizations simply because they need and deserve that help, we note that they should also be helped because they serve our world's cultural heritage by both creating and protecting it. Some examples.
Consider a project in Los Angeles by the muralist Judy Baca. Her monumental mural tells the story of LA through the lens of interracial harmony, collaboratively created with local artists, community members, and more than 400 youth during the summers of 1976 to 83. The site attracts worldwide visitors. Of interest, this site of public memory just received major monument funding from the Mellon Foundation. One artist's vision became a community monument. It's now being revitalized to become an even more relevant and powerful part of the cultural history of LA.
Native American artists preserve their cultural heritage by performing traditional music and dance. American Jewish musicians preserve the Yiddish language through klezmer music. But these are existing cultural expressions, not new ones. In contrast, I want to move to the international arena because I couldn't find an American example of the following. Senegalese musician Benoit Fader Keita is making rap music in Menik, his native language, which is facing extinction. By using Menik in a popular art form, he is helping protect and save his cultural heritage. Let's listen to just a very little bit of his recording.
Yo, purchase all tracks today.
Sorry, but in the interest of time, I'm going to move on but please do go listen to his work, which you can find on YouTube. So not only, though, do artists directly create and protect cultural heritage, they can also enliven World Heritage sites, drawing tourism and money, creating opportunities for understanding the relationship between past and present, and creating opportunities for other artists and arts organizations. The plan for the UNESCO World Heritage Site at Hegra has natural and cultural features and was developed with the local community. And it calls for galleries, open air theater, installations, and more. And I do want to note that we could also bring ourselves back to the US here because our World Trade Center site, which is not a World Heritage site, but very important to us here, which we started out with at the beginning, that is also has different exhibits that are now there, a museum, and there will be a theater built there. But we think these kinds of models are very valuable for people to look at as they continue to think about how the arts and artists can be integrated into World Heritage sites. So we hope that we've actually demonstrated how essential artists and other human laborers are to our cultural heritage. We therefore have a call to UNESCO. Expand the World Heritage Convention to acknowledge the human labor essential to cultural heritage. Revise Article 5. Illuminate the human labor from the past that resulted in World Heritage sites. Acknowledge and protect artists and others in the present who make our art and monuments. If we don't protect them and ensure their recovery from disasters, we may not have cultural heritage in the future. And while we understand that there is a convention also for safeguarding intangible cultural heritage, we think even intangible culture is a concept, a thing. And if this pandemic has shown us nothing else, at least in the US, we have come to see much more clearly the centrality and vitality of people, not just things.
Thank you very, very much, Ted and Amy, for that brilliant sort of double act. That's a fantastic double act, actually. And I cannot think, actually, of a better way of encapsulating the discussion we're having today than your concept that essentially art, culture, creativity, heritage are a continuum. They are interlinked, intertwined on so many levels, and to sort of separate them out is an injustice to the topic and actually doesn't reflect a reality at all. And I also think your point about linking people and things, not separating those things out conceptually is hugely important. I'm gonna move on and ask some broader questions, but I just want to ask you guys one very quick question, and I apologize if this was in your presentation and didn't come out, but NCAPA, which is a sort of very prescient initiative, although very much in response to the natural disaster of Katrina. What's been your sort of main achievement in sort of influencing, maybe not legislation, but public policy, bringing together the disaster side of public policy and the arts and culture and heritage side of public policy, would you say?
What I will say is that really there were two streams that were developing simultaneously in our country. So there was a cultural heritage self-help movement, and there was also an arts self-help movement. We started later in the arts. And we borrowed from them, and some of what we did was modeled on the cultural heritage stream. But then we also really focused on the people. So the differences really are that they are focusing on the things by and large, and we are focusing on the people, and those needs are more about loss of income. They're totally intertwined, and arts museums are both arts and cultural heritage. I think what we would say, we are working together more, and part of that comes from advocacy we've done from funders, chiefly the Mellon Foundation, that sought to put us more together. But we have to head in a direction where we're more integrated. And I don't know, Ted might have further thoughts.
I also think that we've raised the issue that this is both a national issue and a state local issue, that the preparedness and the thinking about this has to be done by everybody.
Yeah, okay, that's a good point. And I think Isidora might come back to you on that when she asks you some questions later. But I'm just gonna now go back to our panel with a set of questions really around what have we learned from the experience of the last year, and well, maybe it's more like 15 months now. What have we learned from the COVID crisis? And a number of you have kind of touched on this during the course of this, but I just want to kind of draw this out. And I want to start, if I can, to go back to the beginning with Yumi. Are you there? And I want to ask you, Yumi, how has your project evolved in response to the COVID crisis in that particular town? And do you think that your experience of working post-tsunami prepared you better to be a kind of creative response to COVID?
本当にその、COVID で私たちの活動も、思うようにいっていません。相手がお年寄りなので、なかなか私たちがフェイストゥフェイスで向き合うということがとても難しくなっていますけれども、今この、1年間、私たちの活動を、それを逆手にとってさらに深めていくチャンスかなっていうふうに、ちょっと発想をチェンジして、私たちのこれまでの活動や、今まで200から300ぐらいの、キリコを作ってきてるんですけれども、それを、一つの冊子にまとめて皆さんに、冊子で見てもらう、そういう活動をしています。で、そのことによって、私たちの、活動をさらに多くの町の皆さんに知っていただいて、お互いにその冊子を通して、コミュニティの人たちが、あの人には、こういう人生の側面があったんだなっていうことに気づいていただけるような、出会い直しを図る、そういうチャンスにしようと思って今、活動をしています。
Okay, I don't think we got all of that, but I might come back to you, Yumi, but I just want to move on. So from Yumi's experience, which is essentially saying that they've been able to kind of, if you like, kind of adapt their practice to respond to the COVID thing. I wanted to turn to you, if possible, Eve, another artist. Thank you very much for your presentation. I wrote down, I like your little phrase, creativity as a tool for resilience. From your practice over the last year, what do you, someone said to me in the office very early on, this COVID crisis is a dress rehearsal for the real climate crisis when it really, really hits us, yeah, on a global level. Is that true? Has COVID been a kind of a dress rehearsal? Has it been a way of us kind of learning better, becoming more aware, doing the things we need to do to be prepared, in your opinion?
I think I'm going to answer that a little bit from the sort of artist hat and a little bit from personal experience. Right. I do agree that that's true. I think that, we learned, I mean, particularly in the States, and I think this is now kind of coming becoming clearer globally because the vaccine rollout, the kind of inequities built into the systems that we rely upon. The fact that, you know, communities were getting hit harder, communities that had less access to resources were being hit harder by the pandemic. But at the same time, we saw, I was in New York City in March of last year when it got hit really hard. We saw a lot of communities coming together and tapping into their sort of smaller resources and creating tools to help one another out. There are mutual aid societies, there's all sorts of food sharing, and the entire heat response project has happened during the lockdown. We started the project in January, brought all the artists on board in March. I haven't met most of the artists in person, but what it kind of made clear was the things that are really valuable. And I think we worked with the creativity and with our communities to develop ways to connect to one another, even though we couldn't be in person. So using creative tools, we had one artist, Jenna Robb, used a whole like pen pal program between youth and elderly. And so I think one of the things that we've learned, and I hope this sticks with us, but I'm really worried seeing countries coming out of lockdown that it's not sticking, that there's a lot of value in that, in those small human connections, in building resilience at the really community level. So I think there's a lot of creativity that can be used to come up with solutions that we can then scale up. And there's a lot that we've learned through the COVID crisis and how to build that creative web of resilience. So yes, is the answer. Yes, I do think it's been a dress rehearsal.
So I can kind of understand the point you're making about the fact that it's kind of, in a sense, kind of built these local, very human relationships, and those interconnections are basically a definition of resilience, aren't they? The stronger those kinds of human relationships, the more resilient you are humanly and environmentally. But do you think that as someone who works really, this is the world you live in, this is where your headspace is, are, generally speaking, people more aware of the climate emergency and how utterly interconnected the whole world is around this, and what a kind of the global nature of a crisis, and how, you know, everything kind of is linked to it in one way or another? Do you think there's a greater kind of global consciousness about it?
So you're probably asking someone who's too immersed in it. So, you know, I'm working on a lot of different projects, and, you know, one of the things I'm working on now is thinking about the economic system and degrowth and how we think about that from a global perspective. Yeah. But even thinking about on the smaller scale, like working in the communities in Philadelphia, I think there's a growth. I don't think we're there. I think the knowledge around human-induced climate change is like a really high level now. But I do think, as you're alluding to, the idea that we're all globally interconnected in the systems that are going to have to change, the transformation that's going to have to happen, like, I think that's just starting to emerge. I do think it's really useful to be able to point to the pandemic and say, you know, if we're not ensuring that everybody is getting access to the vaccine, you know, no one is safe, we have to care for everybody, and that is at the community level, and that's at the global level as well. And I think that's a really useful lens for saying the same thing with the climate change. If we can't ensure that everybody's participating in mitigation and adaptation, then no one is safe. And I do see in the conversations that we have at the community level that people are able to think more systems level thinking, like piece things together and say, like, okay, I see how the kind of racist history of infrastructure building in this community has meant that we are now 10 to 20 degrees hotter. And I see also how the changes that we make, if we can scale that up, that can have a positive impact on our community. And so I start to understand how we as a whole city operate, and then, you know, keep scaling that out. With a lot of my projects, it really is about like scale up, scale up, scale up. So we scale up understanding the problem, and we scale up the solutions as well. Okay.
Well, it sounds to me that you yourself personally, as an artist and practitioner, that it's been a great learning experience for you, and you've been able to take, you know, that practice you've built up over all those years and apply it to this new circumstance. So that's good news for everybody. So good luck. Right. Okay. So I have two very quick announcements as we move on. Number one is please please post some questions, because then Isidora and I can ask our beautiful panel. I don't think I can see any there, but please, if anyone has any questions, post some questions. And also, we've had apologies from the People's Palace Projects people. Have I said that right? The People's Palace Projects people, yeah. That they've had to, they've got some kind of emergency. I hope it's not a natural one, but anyway, they've got some kind of emergency, so they've had to leave. Otherwise, I would have asked them that question. Polly, I want to move to Lagos, another artist actually. One of the things that really struck me about your presentation was just, you know, the kind of huge scale of the kind of social situation and just the lack of resources, if you like, that you work with as a sort of matter of rule. I know that in Nigeria, in Lagos particularly, you've had some really, really challenging months, haven't you? What have you learned as somebody who is helping build resilience and awareness in Lagos? What have you learned from the crisis?
Oh, goodness me.
Big question, I know. Big question.
Somewhat. What have I learned? What have myself and the team learned? I have to say, we were not prepared at all for the COVID pandemic. We were in total denial. And then this juggernaut hit us all, and we immediately all screeched to a halt. What have we learned? I think, you know, Nigeria has this weird way of leapfrogging. When there's a problem, you think, my goodness me, we've got these insurmountable infrastructure issues. How are we ever going to get there? And all of a sudden, Nigeria leapfrogs forward. So, goodness me, what have I learned? Actually, it's all about community, isn't it? And looking inwards. There is this Nigerian expression which kind of goes along the lines of, when you're looking for your trousers, you might actually find you're already in your trousers. And I think this has been that situation. We found we're already in our trousers. And what were those trousers we were looking for is how to penetrate these communities. We just needed to see our communities differently. And so finding that, actually, we had women across the country, we have people across the country, they might not have completed secondary school education or tertiary education, they might be conventionally deemed illiterate, they might not speak English, but they are highly educated, they are sophisticated, they might write Arabic, they have very strong identity within their mother tongue. We need to celebrate that and bring them to the fore. You know, even pre-pandemic, when we're talking about the work that we do, we're talking about the soft skills we're developing, the 4 C's of the 21st century: creativity, collaboration, communication, critical thinking, that those were the skills we were developing. We had already pre-pandemic started talking about the skills of the 22nd century and what were those looking like. And what those were looking like, again, the 4 C's of caring, compassion, communication, community, and culture. So we were already talking about that pre-pandemic, and then pandemic happened, and those 4 C's came to the fore. We pulled through the pandemic because those 4 C's came to the fore, and those 4 C's might, when I watched what was going on in Europe and the US, people talking about these 4 C's as if they were foreign concepts, and then actually, those are the 4 C's at the heart of our communities here. We have culture at the heart of our communities. Our communities at grassroots level are unbelievably strong. Our communities at grassroots level are highly compassionate and caring. So it's working with those people directly in communities. That's what we've learned, that, you know, we're already in our trousers. They're there, we're wearing them. We just need to understand that they're there.
Fantastic. I hope that's one of the big takeaways of this session. I think I could just repeat the trouser thing again. What's the saying?
The line of, if you're looking for your trousers, you're going to find you're already wearing them.
Okay, great. Let's Isidora, let's record that as one of the lessons of our webinar. Before I hand over to Isidora, I just wanted to come back to Ted and Amy. So the arts and creative sector in the US has been devastated by COVID. I know this because we have 5 cities from the US in our World Cities Culture Forum, and we're actually currently working for Bloomberg Philanthropies, and they've been very active in all the kind of emergency response. So I get quite a lot of updates on all that. Do you think the experience of coming together, not just your organization, but the funders, the cities, the arts service organizations? Do you think that on a kind of organizational and policy level in the US, this COVID's made you better prepared? Has it increased your preparedness, your readiness?
Yeah. Do you want to? Well, I will just mention that I think the first thing that COVID showed us was how incredibly unprepared we were as an entire country. Mm-hmm. I think it's shocking to live in New York City, where you think everything's so advanced, and even our hospital systems were completely unprepared and were changing daily in terms of their policies. But an extraordinary thing did happen in New York City, that various groups began speaking to each other, not-for-profit arts and cultural organizations, first informally, and then more and more groups found out they were speaking. And then it became a Zoom call, and then it got a name called NYC Culture at 3. And there have been as many as 500 on these Zoom sessions sometimes. They're generally the leaders of not-for-profit cultural organizations, but Ted and I both sit in as independents. And they are small, medium, large organizations. When George Floyd was killed, all of our discussion actually became about the racial equity issues within the sector. And this forum or network, they call it a space, became a place where everyone could essentially come together for peer support, for information. It began to do advocacy. I mean, it really mushroomed in an extraordinary way. And the other thing I wanted to say is that I also think that, in fact, you know, the Black Lives Matter movement began before the pandemic, right? But the fact that people were sitting in their homes and had the chance to really be watching something over and over again, that a friend of mine once said, you know, the fact that we're on these Zooms where all of us have an equal sized square makes it more democratic for all of us. It does away with a certain level of hierarchy and pretense. And that murder in this space, I think, accentuated the fact that the idea of equity and Black Lives Matter came to life even more. And I would say that the arts and cultural sector has played a huge role in all of this. So I'm going to stop and let Ted talk now.
Okay, interesting, thanks.
I think it's very complex. I think for all of us, we've had to deal with this on a kind of personal level, on a global level, and I believe now some of the harder work is ahead of what does this mean in terms of change, in terms of politics and policy. The Culture at 3, for example, has really seen us as a total community. But it's given us a chance to rethink what matters, what we really value, what we care about, and what we need to do about the disparities that exist because of the brokenness of the system. It's also allowed us, as many examples here today did, to reimagine what might be possible. That's where the tough work is ahead. And so I think we've seen a vision of what could make a difference. But now we know what needs to change and what we need to repair. And how do we then work together with others who in other sectors are facing similar issues to move ahead.
Great. Okay, on that note of working together, which is kind of the point made in the chat by Umberto, I'm going to hand you, thank you very much, Ted, for that, and Amy, I'm going to hand you over to Isidora.
Thank you to all of you for the interesting answers. I will mix the last question with the one of Umberto. And we have been getting some clues about this during the session, but maybe we can use this as your last words, as your invitation. for all of us to work from now on. So the key lessons of all the presentation is that formal protection measures on heritage on their own are not enough. In fact, the best resilient approach might be to generate human interest and empathy for heritage with creative activities. So I would like to ask you, how well is this understood in your country or territory? And why do you think that heritage management distances itself from the communities and people? It is a deep question. So if one of you want to volunteer as the first one speaking, that would be great. If not, I can select.
I'll take a step. I mean, I think it's because, unfortunately, I think on some level, historically, we can see the heritage, we can see what is tangible for sure. So it's obvious. Also, when it's impacted, it takes so much money to restore it and ensure that it's protected. And I really do think that our systems tend to devalue people and value things. And, I think of this, I also have a background in my past of having been an attorney. And if you look at our US Constitution, there is a clause that talks about creating copyright and patents. And that was in order to encourage people to create works of art and useful inventions. But over time in our country, what happened is we in fact said that corporations were people and gave them the rights as a person. And then if anyone who's an artist knows, if you work for an organization, you lose your copyright. The contingency for giving them the work is that they then own the copyright. So I really think there's a devaluation, and I see this moment, and I really do credit the pandemic for this, that the pandemic has made us really see people and issues of equity more. And I just hope that it is a beginning, because I think if we don't value people, and I can tell you in the Biden-Harris administration, they have said equity is vital, and they've made every agency look to its equity stance. And this is a huge movement in this country now. But if we're not careful, we could go the opposite way. And I think that this may be the same worldwide, but I don't think we value people enough. And that's what I think the problem is.
Thank you, Amy. Ted, please. I love the volunteers.
I also do think that there's, in the public's mind, there's a separation between products and maker, particularly in the arts. And in general, the public doesn't understand the process of what that is about. And therefore, they're not seeing the link that cultural heritage is. It's about things, not about makers and the people who built the things. I mean, most people do not, they see a play, they go to a museum, they see the picture. They don't understand who made it, and that needs support. It is an education process, and it's an awareness process. Linking to what we've been saying is that people and things need to come together, even by organizations who are presenting the things. They need to keep reminding people that there were makers involved in this, whether dead or alive.
Thank you, Ted. Eve or Polly, each of you. Polly, maybe.
So I'm coming from a very, very different perspective, sitting here in Lagos. Excuse my white face on this particular conversation. We have a very young demographic in Nigeria. The average age in Nigeria is 23 or 24. Our president is in his 70s. Most of our politicians are in their 60s and their 70s. So heritage management is in the hands of people from a very, very different generation to our average age. Our young people are not involved in this dialogue. They've got no idea about the dialogue. So of course, the whole dialogue and narrative around decolonizing the public space, the restitution of artifacts, our young people in this country are completely disconnected from that. If there's no history taught in school, if there's no importance laid on learning about history and your own culture, how on earth are these young people going to enter that narrative and that conversation? So heritage management is going to stay in the hands of people who are much older, who are elite, who tend to be politicians. So we have a huge challenge there. So 5 Cowries in my organization, we're currently designing an arts education program around involving children and youth and our educators to see if we can get young people involved in that narrative. But it's a huge endeavor because our young people are not part of this narrative at all and are completely unaware. So yeah, we're coming from a very, very different perspective here, and there's a lot of work to do. And as I said, the fact that it's me, a person from UK, involved in this and trying to drive this narrative forward, I think actually speaks volumes as well. Yeah, so there's a very different perspective from this side.
Thank you, Polly. Eve, please.
I just want to start with saying ditto to everything that's been said before, and kind of also refer back to the video that you shared right at the beginning, where it talks about the cultural heritage sites as being drivers of tourism dollar, and kind of weaving together everything that's been said. So many countries in the world sort of measure their worth based on GDP, right? Gross domestic product. So it really is about production consumption. And so, you know, we think about these sites often as places that can bring in dollar, as opposed to like their inherent value that has to do with our history. We think about art production also as like, well, what's the value of the object, as opposed to really, you know, this idea that really we shouldn't be measuring anything based on GDP. We should be measuring everything based on well-being. And when you think about, you know, my own artwork, I don't make objects at all. The artistic process is really this connectivity, the conversations, the creating of space for imagination. And that has a great deal of value when you think about the value of well-being. You know, if we were to shift away from a production model, we would be doing more of, Amy, I think it was you that was talking about, I can't remember who it was that was talking, maybe it was Mariana, I can't remember, the carrying, the kind of carrying society. And there were like the 3 C's, I think Polly, was that maybe you. That if we shift away from the consumption, the commodification of everything towards one of caring and well-being, then we see how valuable creativity and cultural heritage and knowledge sharing can be. And it, you know, if we weave in the need for equity and all that, we come into a place where it's not about site and object, because it's not about how much money they can bring into a location, but it's about like really creating a more resilient world through a different lens.
Thanks, Eve. And Yumi, maybe, yes, please turn on your English channel, all of you, so we can hear. Thank you, Yumi.
すごい今のお話に本当に共感しました。10年前に私たち、その南三陸町で起こったことなんですけれども、本当に壊滅的に家も仕事場もなくした人たちが、2ヶ月後に、ディアダンス、コミュニティの人たちに代々続いている鹿の踊りがあるんですけれども、それを避難所で子どもたちが踊ったんですね。たまたま衣装だけが全て流されたのに、なぜかそのディアダンスの衣装だけが見つかって、子どもたちがそれを踊って、集落の人たちがものすごく元気づきました。そしてその集落では、今すごく素晴らしいことが起こってるんですけれども、その地域はオイスター、牡蠣の養殖が盛んなんです。それで震災の前には なるべくたくさん牡蠣を取りたいから、みんなが牡蠣棚をたくさん海に仕掛けていたわけです。もうすごい密植状態で牡蠣が育たなかった。だけど、そこの地域の人たちは、利他の心、一つの踊りをみんなで伝えていくために、他者を思う気持ちが本当にありました。それで、1回40人ぐらいの漁師さんが全て自分たちの牡蠣棚の権利を放棄しました。ゼロにしたんです。そして全体の牡蠣棚の数を3分の1に減らしました。そしたら今では牡蠣がとても早く育って品質のとてもクオリティの高い牡蠣が取れ、40軒の漁師たちが震災の前よりもずっと経済的に成功して儲かるようになりました。で、私はその経済的な成功、産業の成功、復興は他者を思う気持ちをカルチャーが育ててきたっていうそのバックグラウンドにその成功があったんじゃないかっていうふうに思います。で、今回も私たちのところには名のあるヘリテージというよりは本当にアノニマスな名もない人たちによって培われてきた文化があるわけですけれども、その文化をみんなが共有しているっていうことが本当に何か大災害があった時のその復興レジリエンスのすごいバックボーンになっていく、それを私たちが思っています。ですから、そのカルチャーの大切さっていうのを決してその産業や経済の復興と無縁ではないっていうことが南三陸では証明されたのではないかと思います。
Thank you, Yami, and thank you to all of you. We are reaching the end of this webinar, but I would like to thank all the friends and colleagues that help us to reach you. So we were able to build this amazing network. We hope you have enjoyed this session. And the most important part is that we are going to take some lessons from here and bring it to UNESCO and other partners to hopefully build things better in the future. Paul, do you want to say something?
I just want to say, can I just say thank you to all our amazing speakers, an amazing range of perspectives. And actually, I want to thank the artists for the amazing work that they do. I don't think artists get thanked enough, but I think we should thank them for the work they're doing. And the beautiful things they make, whether those are tangible or non-tangible. So at the beginning of this, there was a video and it said heritage needs to be part of the social and cultural dynamics of daily life. And my argument would be that heritage and heritage sites and world heritage is only as resilient as it is connected to the social and cultural dynamics of daily life.
Totally agree. So thank you, all of you. And Umberto, do you want to invite them for the next session?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Isidora and Paul, for the coordination and all the speakers for your contribute to this discussion. I would like to emphasize something that Amy said, that is the centrality of people. We are doing this because we believe that people to be a very central point in this discussion about heritage, about management, about the possibility of heritage to build and create a better society. The aim of our foundation, our heritage, it's related specifically with civil society and the citizenship. We don't know what is the best word for that, but and the relation with heritage, with culture, with lands and territory all around the world. Thank you very much. I would like to invite you to follow us for the rest of the month. And tomorrow specifically, we will have another discussion about informal knowledge Participation and Heritage During Pandemics. It will be coordinated by Christina Dreyfus, and you are very welcome to follow this month activities and all the activities of our World Heritage Foundation. Thank you very much again, and I hope that this will be only the first activity that we will have together. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.